If you think about how a biological immune system actually functions, it really relies entirely on just one vital mechanism.
Right. The ability to recognize what is me and what is not me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when that system is healthy, it creates this invisible, impenetrable boundary. It keeps the body safe from, external pathogens.
Yeah, but if that boundary fails or if the system gets confused, I mean, the body either lets in foreign elements that will destroy it, or worse, it gets totally disoriented and starts attacking itself.
It's terrifying, really.
Hmm.
But that concept, throwing a hard line in the sand just to survive, is the exact framework we are using today. But before we get into the heavy details of how that actually works on a societal level, I want to officially welcome you to today's deep dive.
Yes, a very warm welcome to you.
Wherever you are listening from right now, whether you are on your morning commute or just winding down, I want to offer a sincere divine blessing for your day and for your entire week ahead. May it be filled with clarity, profound peace, and some really meaningful discovery. So today, we are opening up a really fascinating and frankly incredibly intense piece of ancient text. We're looking at Leviticus chapter 18.
Oh, yeah. It is a dense one.
It really is. And we are unpacking this using the comprehensive historical and cultural notes from two sources you shared with us, the Holman Study Bible and the NAA Study Bible. Our mission today is to uncover the bedrock of ancient Israel's moral, societal, and family codes.
Right, we're trying to figure out what it actually meant for this specific group of nomadic people to be called to holiness in the middle of this chaotic landscape of the ancient Near East.
Yeah, and holiness is one of those words that has kind of lost a lot of its edge in our modern vocabulary, hasn't it?
Oh, for sure. Today, people use it to just mean, being a generally good, moral person. But in the ancient context of these study notes, it meant something visceral. It was almost dangerous.
Dangerous how?
Well, it meant being distinctly, radically separate from absolutely everything around you.
Wow. Okay, so to understand that separation, we need to set the ground rules for how we are exploring this. We are essentially stepping into a time machine today.
That's the best way to look at it.
Because Leviticus 18 deals with some highly debated, incredibly charged topics in our modern world. Specifically, it gets into definitions of marriage, family structures, and human sexuality.
Very heavily debated.
Right. And because our job as your guides is just to help you understand the historical source material, we want to be super clear. We aren't taking any political or cultural sides here.
Not at all.
We aren't endorsing the ancient text's worldview, nor are we endorsing any modern commentaries on it. Our goal is strictly to drop you into the sandals of an ancient Israelite so you can understand the mechanics of how they saw the cosmos, how they saw their neighbors, and how they saw themselves.
And honestly, maintaining that ancient lens is the only way this text makes any sense. If we drag our 21st century political battles into a 3,000-year-old desert, we completely obscure what the original writers are trying to communicate to their people.
Totally. So let's fire up that time machine and look at the geopolitical reality of the time. Because you really can't understand the strict rules of Leviticus without understanding exactly where the Israelites were standing on the map.
Right. They were a newly forming nation caught right in the crosshairs of two massive ancient superpowers.
Yeah, the central premise of Leviticus 18, which the historical notes highlight immediately, is God explicitly commanding the Israelites to reject two very specific cultures.
Exactly. They are told, do not act like the Egyptians, which is the empire they have literally just fled. And they are commanded not to act like the Canaanites, which are the people inhabiting the land they are migrating into.
The analogy that comes to mind for me isn't just, moving to a new neighborhood. It's more like a scrappy brand new startup trying to define its corporate culture while being sandwiched between two massive toxic tech monopolies.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. You have the monolithic, bureaucratic nightmare of Egypt behind you and the chaotic, hyper-aggressive market of Canaan in front of you. To survive, you have to be wildly uncompromising about who you are.
Yeah, that startup analogy captures the stakes perfectly, because assimilation would have meant total cultural erasure. And the study Bibles actually dig into the specific practices of these rival monopolies that Israel had to reject.
Let's get into that. What exactly were they rejecting from Egypt?
So in ancient Egypt, the text is responding to the historical reality of royal incest. It was standard practice for Egyptian pharaohs to marry their own sisters or their half-sisters.
Wait, really? Just as a standard practice? To our modern ears, that is super jarring. But we have to ask why the Egyptians did it right. It wasn't just a random cultural quirk.
No, it wasn't random at all. It was entirely about power and theology. The pharaohs viewed themselves as literal living deities.
Right, God kings.
Exactly. And in their mythological framework, gods only married other gods. So, to keep the royal bloodline perfectly pure and divine, you couldn't marry a regular human. You married within the immediate royal family.
Wow, so it basically concentrated supreme political and religious power into this closed genetic loop.
Yep, it kept all the power in the family, quite literally.
So Leviticus is drawing a hard boundary against the power structures of their former oppressors. But then they look forward to Canaan. What was going on there?
Well, the sources note Canaanite culture was historically identified with a completely different but equally rejected set of practices.
Okay, like what?
The historical and archaeological records surrounding the Canaanites involve these deep integrations of extreme fertility cults. And that included practices like bestiality, ritualized homosexuality in temple settings, and literal child sacrifice.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly dark. So the Levitical text is essentially setting up this massive ideological firewall. It's saying, you are not the empire behind you and you are not the tribes ahead of you. You are an entirely new creation.
Exactly. They are building a fortress of identity.
But, if I am an exhausted ancient Israelite wandering in the desert, I might just want to fit in. I mean, assimilation is always the path of least resistance. Standing out makes you a target.
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting to be different.
Right. So there has to be an anchor keeping them tethered to these intense countercultural new rules. Like, why not just blend in with the Canaanites and avoid the friction?
Well, the text provides a fascinating psychological anchor for them. If you read through just this one chapter, the phrase, I am the Lord your God, or just I am the Lord, is repeated 6 distinct times.
6 times in one chapter.
Yeah, and the commentaries emphasize that this isn't just literary repetition. It is an absolute claim of ultimate authority.
So it fundamentally shifts the motivation. The law isn't presented as, hey, here is some highly practical advice for building a healthy society.
Right, it's not a self-help book.
It's entirely grounded in the identity of the lawgiver, saying, do this because I am the one telling you to, and I'm the one who pulled you out of slavery.
Exactly, and there is a profound promise attached to that obedience. In verse 5, the text says, keep my statutes. By them you shall live.
By them you shall live. That's heavy.
It is. The historical notes flag this as a massive pillar for all biblical theology that follows. It links flawless obedience to the law with the very promise of life itself.
Okay, so we have this massive national mandate to be different from Egypt and Canaan. But how do you actually build a new society from scratch? I mean, you can't just legislate from the clouds.
No, you have to get practical.
You have to start in the most fundamental unit of civilization, the living room. The text moves from the macro level of geopolitics straight into the micro level of the domestic household. And it lays out this exhaustive, highly specific list of incest prohibitions.
Yeah, it restricts sexual relations across this huge web of close blood relatives. We're talking parents, siblings, grandchildren. And it also extends to relatives by marriage, like aunts, uncles, and daughters-in-law.
And to understand the why behind this really extensive list, the NWA commentary actually provides a brilliant anthropological insight. We have to strip away our modern concept of a nuclear family living in a detached suburban house.
Completely. You have to forget the modern American dream house.
Right. An ancient Israelite household was a sprawling ecosystem. You're talking about massive interconnected compounds made up of extended family, multiple generations, servants, and laborers, all living, cooking, and sleeping in incredibly close proximity.
And the potential for abuse, for coercion, and for exploitation within that tight-knit patriarchal power structure was astronomically high.
I can imagine.
I mean, if the head of a household or a powerful older brother decided to exploit someone within that compound, there was literally nowhere for the victim to go.
So these laws basically act as an internal immune system for the family unit.
Precisely. The sources explain that these exhaustive laws were engineered to create an impenetrable psychological boundary between family affection and erotic love.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. By drawing these hard lines, the text is trying to ensure that the ancient household remains a sanctuary of safety, economic support, and mutual care, rather than, devolving into a predatory environment of sexual exploitation where the most vulnerable members are victimized.
That makes total sense for the broader rules protecting dependents. But I noticed one rule in the notes that feels highly specific. It almost feels like it has a backstory.
Which one?
It strictly prohibits a man from marrying a woman and her sister as a rival. Why single out marrying two sisters? That seems incredibly pointed.
It is pointed, and commentaries link it directly to the historical trauma of the Israelites' own ancestors. If you rewind back to the book of Genesis, you have the famous narrative of the patriarch Jacob marrying two sisters, Rachel and Leah.
Oh, right. And if you read that story, it is just a masterclass in absolute domestic dysfunction.
It is a nightmare of toxic polygamous rivalry. I mean, the two sisters are constantly weaponizing their fertility, they're pitting their children against each other, and they're fighting for their husband's affection.
It's so intense.
And it fractures the family so badly that the children of those sisters eventually sell their own brother, Joseph, into slavery.
Wow. So the study notes suggest that this specific Levitical law was written to kind of look back at that ancestral trauma and say, we saw how this destroyed the very foundation of our patriarch's family. We are permanently legislating against it ever happening again.
Exactly. They're essentially looking at the diseased branches of their own family tree and pruning them off to save the roots.
That is fascinating. And the cultural weight of these specific marital laws echoed for centuries. The Holman source points out that John the Baptist, hundreds of years later, used this exact Levitical code to publicly rebuke King Herod for marrying his own brother Philip's wife.
Which ultimately cost John the Baptist his head.
Yeah, it did.
But it demonstrates how deeply embedded these boundaries became. They were viewed as the absolute, uncompromising standard for moral conduct. I mean, they were powerful enough to be wielded against a sitting monarch.
So, moving beyond the boundaries of the home, the text transitions into societal taboos that are much broader and carry incredibly severe consequences. And this is where the ancient mindset gets really fascinating to me, because they blend what we would categorize as moral laws with ancient ritual laws.
Yeah, to a modern listener, putting these things in the exact same chapter feels really disjointed.
It does. So it requires us to understand how they categorize the universe. Let's look at how the study Bibles break down these ancient transgressions, starting with the concept of ritual impurity.
Okay, so the text forbids sexual relations during a woman's menstruation. To grasp this, we really have to look at the underlying Hebrew concept of tame. The notes point out this word is used 85 times in the book of Leviticus alone.
85 times. So what does tame actually mean?
Well, it generally translates to being unclean or contaminated, but the NAA source makes a vital distinction that modern readers almost always miss. This was specifically about ritual or ceremonial impurity, not moral evil.
Okay, expand on how that actually worked in their daily lives. Like, if an ancient Israelite was tame, were they treated like a criminal?
Not at all. Being ritually impure wasn't a sin, it was just a temporary state of being. You see, the ancient worldview closely associated God with absolute unending life.
Right.
Therefore, anything that symbolized human mortality or the loss of life force or death like blood, childbirth, skin diseases, or even touching a corpse made a person temporarily incompatible with the sacred space of the tabernacle.
Oh, so it was a category clash.
Exactly. You don't bring symbols of mortality into the presence of immortality.
Okay, so if you were tame, you simply waited a designated time, you washed, and you went back to normal life. You just couldn't participate in community worship for a few days. It's a boundary of symbolism.
Yes.
But then you encounter a completely different category in the text, one that is treated with absolute horror, the profane.
Yeah. This brings us to the severe prohibitions regarding the deity Molech.
The text explicitly forbids anyone from giving their children to be passed through the fire to Molech. Let's pull the curtain back on this because it is incredibly dark. But we need to understand the mechanism of why this was happening in the ancient world.
Right. So Molech was an underworld deity worshipped by the Ammonites and Canaanites. And the sources connect this practice to the Phoenicians and, later on, the Carthaginians. The historical consensus strongly points to this being a literal practice of infant sacrifice, where children were burned to appease the god.
But why? I mean, no parent wakes up and casually decides to do that. What was the ancient psychological mechanism that drove a culture to systemic child sacrifice?
It was driven by this desperate belief in sympathetic magic and cosmic transaction.
Cosmic transaction.
Yeah, in the Canaanite worldview, the gods controlled everything. The rain, the fertility of the soil, victory in war. But the gods required feeding. So if there was a famine or a massive army on your border, the ancient logic dictated that you had to offer the gods your most valuable, precious asset to guarantee your survival. Giving up a child was the ultimate, desperate transaction to manipulate the divine realm into saving the city.
Wow. Now, the notes do mention a secondary theory, right? That giving children to Molech Might have meant handing them over to be trained as temple prostitutes.
They do mention that, yeah. But the primary historical weight leans heavily toward literal sacrifice.
Either way, whether it was immolation or forced cultic slavery, Leviticus categorizes this as profane. It wasn't just a ritual impurity you could wash off, it was the ultimate corruption of innocent life. And doing it in the land God claimed was viewed as a profound, intolerable desecration of the divine name itself.
Absolutely.
And then we hit a third category the text outlines, the abominations and confusions. Looking at the notes, the text labels homosexuality as an abomination and bestiality as a confusion. Now, again, holding our impartial time machine lens here, why did the ancient writers use these specific heavy terms?
Well, the study Bibles explain that these acts were viewed by the ancient writers through the lens of the Genesis creation narrative.
Which to them wasn't just a story, it was the architectural blueprint of the entire universe.
Precisely. In their cosmology, God brought order out of primordial chaos by creating distinct boundaries. He separated light from darkness, he pulled the dry land out of the chaotic sea, and he established the specific parameters of human relationships and reproduction.
So in the ancient mind, to engage in acts outside of that perceived creation order wasn't just breaking a local civic ordinance.
No, it was viewed as unordering the cosmos. By crossing the boundaries of species with an animal, or violating the male-female binary they saw established in Genesis, they believed a person was literally dragging primordial chaos back into the ordered world.
Wow.
That is why the text uses the word confusion. It is a structural undoing of creation itself.
That perfectly sets up the final massive piece of the puzzle. We have this biological immune system trying to define a nation. We have strict boundaries protecting the home and severe categorizations of ritual, moral, and profane acts designed to maintain the order of the universe.
Right.
So what happens when the immune system gets overwhelmed? What is the consequence if these ancient codes are broadly broken?
This is where the ancient worldview radically and dramatically diverges from our own. The penalty for these transgressions wasn't merely personal, like being fined or sent to a local prison. It was communal. And astonishingly, it was environmental.
The environmental aspect is staggering to me. The text outlines personal punishments, like being cut off from the people, which is essentially banishment or death.
Yeah.
But then the text personifies the geography itself. It treats the physical dirt as a living entity.
It does. The text warns that because of these cumulative abominations, the land itself has become deeply contaminated. And it uses a violently visceral metaphor. It warns that if the Israelites commit these acts, the land will literally vomit them out, just as it is vomiting out the Canaanites before them.
Vomit out. It doesn't say God will send an army to evict you. It suggests that the mountains, the rivers, the soil, the actual ecosystem will become so nauseated and sickened by human corruption that it will involuntarily expel the human beings living on top of it.
It's a powerful image.
Think about how completely foreign that is to a modern Western mindset. Today, we exist in these hyper-individualized bubbles. The general consensus is, what I do in my private life is my own business, and it doesn't affect the physical world around me.
But the ancient mind saw no separation between blood and soil. Personal actions carried immense cosmic weight.
They believe the moral ecosystem was physically wired into the biological ecosystem. If the people became sufficiently corrupted, the land would react exactly like a human body rejecting a virus. It would forcefully purge the infection, resulting in total national exile. You cannot poison the moral well without poisoning the physical water.
It is a crushing, severe understanding of interconnectedness. The moral fabric of the community and the literal dirt under their sandals were bound together. The fate of the individual, the family, and the environment were all one single narrative.
We have covered an immense amount of historical and cultural ground today. Let's pull all these threads together. We've explored how ancient Israel, a nation fresh out of slavery, utilized exhaustive legal codes to carve out a distinct, uncompromising identity.
Yeah, they were building a massive ideological boundary wall to protect themselves from the imperial power structures of Egypt behind them and the chaotic, transactional religious practices of Canaan ahead of them.
Right. And we examine how they drew incredibly sharp boundaries around their family structures. They engineered laws to protect the vulnerable from exploitation within those massive, multi-generational ancient households.
And we explored the deep, ancient logic separating temporary ritual impurity from the profound horrors of the profane, like the Molech sacrifices, and the acts they viewed as unraveling the very order of creation.
And we finally landed on that visceral, unforgettable image of consequence. The ancient belief that human morality and the physical environment are so deeply intertwined that the land itself can reject a corrupt society.
As we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to turn over in your mind. It goes back to that profound tension we highlighted earlier in Leviticus 18:5. He who does them shall live by them.
That ancient promise of earning life through flawless obedience to the law.
Exactly. I want you to consider how that single ancient concept sparked some of the most massive philosophical and theological earthquakes in human history centuries later.
Oh, for sure.
Early Christian thinkers, Jewish scholars, and modern philosophers have spent lifetimes debating the sheer weight of that phrase. It is the absolute root of the tension between rules, grace, and human morality.
Wow.
Is true life found in the strict, unyielding obedience to a perfect code? Or, because humans inevitably fail, is life ultimately found in grace when that code is broken? That massive debate, which still rages today, starts right here in the sand of this ancient text.
That is a brilliant thought to chew on, and it loops us right back to our opening idea of the immune system. A system's job is to define strict boundaries to keep the body alive. But the eternal lingering question is, at what point do the boundaries become so heavy that they crush the very life they were designed to protect?
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the historical world of Leviticus 18. It has been an absolute privilege to explore these ancient mechanisms with you. As we officially close, I want to declare that God blesses all the listeners. May you carry the curiosity and the deep historical insight from today into everything you do this week. Take care, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.